There is one phrase that every analyst covering this conflict needs to burn into their memory right now. Survival is victory. Hold on to that idea because it is going to completely change how you see this war between the United States, Israel, and Iran. And before we go any further, let's establish one thing clearly. There are no true winners in any war. But if we are going to talk about who is winning and who is losing, we first need to understand what winning actually looks like for each side. Because in this conflict, the two sides are not even competing by the same rules. This war was supposed to be short, a weekend operation, a precision strike designed to cut off the Iranian leadership, create internal chaos, and bring down the regime within a matter of days. That was the plan on paper. Now, nearly 5 weeks later, the reality on the ground looks almost nothing like what Washington and Tel Aviv had projected. And the distance between what was promised and what has actually unfolded represents one of the most serious intelligence failures the Western world has seen in decades. If you want the real picture of what is happening in this war, not the version being carefully packaged for you by mainstream outlets, subscribe to From Report right now. Hit the notification bell and join us live Monday through Friday. Now let's get into it. On the very first day of this conflict, the United States and Israel launched what military strategists call a decapitation strike. The goal was simple in concept: eliminate Iran's supreme leadership, create a power vacuum so severe that the regime would collapse under its own weight. Technically, that opening strike succeeded. The supreme leader was killed along with several senior commanders. But what the CIA and Mossad apparently never accounted for was everything that followed. And before we move forward, something must be said plainly, because it cannot simply be brushed past. 175 girls between the ages of 12 and 14, some even younger, were killed in a primary school on that opening day. The UN Security Council condemned it. The UN General Assembly condemned it. The Washington Post was among the first major outlets to report on it publicly. And the question that no one in power seems willing to answer is devastatingly simple. With satellite imagery, GPS-guided precision weapons, and the most advanced military technology on the planet, how do you strike a school full of children at the start of a school morning? How does a primary school get confused with a military installation? The honest answer to that question is profoundly uncomfortable. And the fact that no one will face accountability for it tells you everything about how international law actually operates when the world's most powerful nations choose to ignore it. Now back to the decapitation strategy and why it collapsed so completely. The entire operation rested on one core assumption: remove the supreme leader and the system falls apart. What the intelligence agencies failed to correctly anticipate was the succession. Ali Khamenei's son, Mojtaba Khamenei, has now stepped forward as his father's replacement. And here is where the miscalculation becomes catastrophic for Washington. Mojtaba is younger than his father. He is more hardline than his father. He has deep, long-standing connections within the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And on the very first day of this war, he lost his father, his wife, his daughter, his sister, and his brother-in-law, all in a single strike. Sit with that for a moment. Every morning when the new supreme leader opens his eyes, his first thought is not about negotiation. It is not about compromise. It is not about a 15-point peace framework. It is about revenge. The CIA and Mossad did not merely fail to stop the succession. They handed power to someone more hardened, more motivated, and more willing to endure punishment than the man they eliminated. That is not a tactical mistake. That is a strategic catastrophe. Reports in major American publications, not Russian state media, not Iranian propaganda, not Chinese outlets, but American newspapers, have now openly acknowledged that both the CIA and Mossad misjudged the situation. They anticipated that the initial bombardment would spark a popular uprising against the Ayatollah system within days. First, they said 1 week, then they revised it to 4 weeks. We are now entering week 5, and the regime is not collapsing, it is consolidating. Stay with us on Vortex Global Report. This analysis goes places that mainstream coverage simply refuses to go. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Iran released a military statement in the past several hours that deserves to be read with full attention, because it does not sound like a statement from a country that believes it is losing. Tehran said there will be no compromises. Iran will decide for itself when and how any return to normalcy takes place, and they specifically stated, do not call any agreement a defeat. That is the language of resistance. That is the posture of a government that believes time is working in its favor. And when you look at the actual dynamics on the ground, it is difficult to argue with that assessment. A professor at Johns Hopkins University framed it in terms that cut straight to the core of this conflict. For Iran, survival is victory. And that single sentence restructures the entire analytical framework. Iran is not attempting to defeat the United States militarily. They understand that is not achievable. Their strategy is something far more calculated and far more patient. The objective is to absorb enough punishment, inflict enough cost, and hold on long enough that the political and economic toll on Washington and Tel Aviv becomes unbearable, and their own allies begin pushing back. And here is the critical point, that strategy is already producing results. Let's examine the negotiation front, because the contradiction between what Washington is saying publicly and what it is doing privately is almost impossible to explain away. The Trump administration sent Iran a 15-point ceasefire proposal. The details that leaked were striking in their ambition: complete dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program, full reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, severing all connections with Hezbollah, ending support for Palestinian groups, cutting ties with Yemen. In other words, Iran was being asked to dismantle everything it has constructed over decades of regional strategy in exchange for the bombing stopping. Iran's response was essentially, you cannot be serious. And that response is entirely rational. Before this war even started, Iran had already been engaged in negotiations on many of those exact issues. Talks were underway in Oman. Iran had signaled genuine willingness to reach a deal. Then, the day after those signals were sent, the bombs fell. The supreme leader was killed. The school was struck. Iran had previously agreed to a nuclear framework during Trump's first term. Trump himself walked away from it, tore it up unilaterally. Now, the same administration is asking Iran to sign a new version of essentially the same agreement, after bombing the country for 4 straight weeks. Why would any government trust that? What guarantee could possibly carry credibility after that kind of track record? Iran is not being irrational by refusing. It is being logical. But here is the element that makes this situation even more volatile, and which the official briefings are dramatically underemphasizing. While the Trump administration is publicly speaking about peace proposals and ceasefire frameworks, it is simultaneously deploying additional forces. A new unit of airborne paratroopers, soldiers specifically trained to enter territory and seize it, has just been announced as part of a deployment that also includes 2,500 Marines from an expeditionary unit already en route to the region. Read that again. Peace proposal in one hand, paratroopers in the other. Iran is reading that combination with perfect clarity. They responded with what analysts described as dark humor, releasing a satirical video referencing the Iraq occupation model, signaling unmistakably that they understand exactly what the paratroopers are for. Iran is not improvising. Reports based on leaked Iranian intelligence suggest that the late Supreme Leader had prepared a detailed contingency plan for precisely this scenario, a U.S.-Israeli military strike, long before it occurred. What we may be watching is the execution of a plan written years in advance. Trump, by contrast, appears to be making decisions week by week, sometimes day by day. An analyst at Al Jazeera made an observation this week that hit hard. Trump moved from demanding total surrender to negotiating a face-saving exit. That is not the trajectory of the winning side. Now let's talk about why Trump is suddenly in a hurry, because the domestic political dimension of this war is just as important as the military one, and it is being dramatically underreported. Trump faces midterm elections in October and November. A prolonged, expensive, and deeply unpopular war with rising fuel prices is the single worst possible backdrop for those elections. Gasoline prices in the United States have already climbed 30%. Americans are not pleased. The sentiment growing within the U.S. military, and this is being reported, not speculated, is that American soldiers are fighting and dying for Israeli interests, not American ones. No ordinary American citizen feels any ownership of this war. It does not feel like their fight. And when the body bags begin returning home in significant numbers, that feeling will harden into something no messaging campaign can contain. Trump needs this war to end before November. Netanyahu does not operate on that timeline. Netanyahu's political survival depends on military escalation, not de-escalation. And that fundamental divergence in interests is beginning to fracture the alliance in real time. This past weekend, the White House rushed to distance itself from Israeli strikes on South Pars, one of the largest natural gas fields in the world, located in Qatar and Iran. Trump stated publicly that Israel acted alone, that he was not informed in advance, and that it would not happen again. Consider what that statement reveals. The senior partner in this military coalition is publicly disclaiming responsibility for strikes carried out by the junior partner. That is not an alliance. That is two governments pursuing incompatible objectives while nominally fighting the same war. And every time Israel strikes energy infrastructure in Qatar, the UAE, or Iran itself, it drives up global oil prices, which hurts American consumers, which costs Trump votes. Iran does not need to defeat Israel militarily to win the political war inside the United States. It simply needs energy prices to keep rising and the calendar to keep advancing toward November. This is precisely the kind of strategic depth we analyze every day on From Report. Subscribe now, share this transmission, never miss a live show. Let's talk about the economics of the actual fighting, because this dimension explains something that mainstream coverage consistently overlooks. Every Iranian drone costs between $10,000 and $30,000 to produce. Every American interceptor missile costs approximately $1 million. Iran has an estimated stockpile of 80,000 drones. The arithmetic is not complicated. When the U.S. intercepts 1,000 drones, Iran does not concede defeat. It launches 15,000 more. When those are intercepted, it launches 20,000 more. The interceptor stockpile is finite. The drone production line is not. Iran is not trying to win every individual engagement. It is trying to exhaust the defense systems, drain the interceptor reserves, and eventually reach the point where projectiles begin breaking through consistently. That is a deliberate war of attrition designed to bankrupt the defender, and it is working. This asymmetry extends well beyond hardware costs. 13 U.S. military bases in the region have been degraded or forced offline since this conflict began. The U.S. is spending millions of dollars per day to defend installations, intercept incoming fire, and maintain operational readiness in a theater where the adversary is using $10 components to force $10 million responses. That arithmetic does not resolve in Washington's favor no matter how long you run the numbers. So how does this end? Because that question is now being seriously debated among analysts, and two distinct scenarios are emerging. The first scenario, described by some analysts as the most probable near-term outcome, is what might be called a simulated victory. Under this framework, Trump announces that the United States has successfully degraded Iran's nuclear program, that the primary military objectives have been achieved, and that the mission is complete. Israel makes parallel declarations about having eliminated the threat from Iranian leadership and weakened Tehran's regional network. Iran simultaneously declares that it survived a military assault from two of the world's most powerful armed forces, which it did, and presents that survival as a historic achievement. Both sides signed something resembling what they were negotiating before the war began. Both sides sell their domestic audiences a version of events that makes it appear they won. Nobody announces defeat. Nobody acknowledges the gap between what was promised and what was delivered. The world moves on to the next crisis. We have seen this pattern before. It is not satisfying, but it is how conflicts between unequal powers often conclude. The second scenario is darker and far more destabilizing for the entire region. If Trump concludes that the political cost of this war is unsustainable, that Netanyahu is operating beyond his control and dragging the United States deeper into a conflict that is costing him the midterms, he pulls back. America withdraws or dramatically reduces its involvement. Israel is left fighting alone. A country of 9 million people against a nation of 90 million, with no U.S. bases to operate from in the region, no coalition air support, and an adversary that has already demonstrated its ability to damage aircraft carriers and shoot down advanced fighter jets. That second scenario produces something that closely resembles what unfolded in Syria, a regime that survives, governing over ruins, under permanent pressure, but surviving. And under Iran's strategic logic, as we have established, survival counts as winning. And here is the dimension that virtually no one in the Western press wants to address openly, but which may be the most consequential of all. If Iran survives this conflict under either scenario, China and Russia will move immediately to rebuild it. Not gradually, not cautiously, immediately. They will arm Iran to a level it has never previously reached, for the same reason the United States armed Taiwan, to create a permanent counterweight, a deterrent against any future military adventure in the Middle East that Washington might contemplate. China has been watching every single engagement in this war, every vulnerability exposed in U.S. carrier groups, every gap identified in the air defense network, every drone that broke through, every F-35 that did not return. China is not a participant in this war. China is studying it. And while everyone else is bleeding, Russia and Ukraine, the U.S. and the Middle East, Europe drowning in energy costs, Japan and South Korea watching their military equipment get redirected to the Gulf, China is manufacturing, stockpiling, and learning. The United States spent decades constructing military dominance through the projection of force. What this war is demonstrating piece by piece is that projecting force against a determined adversary fighting on its own soil, using asymmetric tactics with nothing left to lose, is far more costly and far less decisive than the doctrine ever assumed. The bottom line, and this is where the survival equals victory framework becomes most powerful, is this. For the United States and Israel, victory was always defined as regime change. The end of the Ayatollah system, the dismantlement of Iran's nuclear and regional capabilities, a compliant Tehran. None of that is happening. None of it appears to be within reach. For Iran, victory is simply still being here when the smoke clears, still governing, still an independent state, still capable of projecting influence across the region. And on that measure right now, today, at the close of week 4, heading into week 5, Iran appears closer to its definition of victory than the United States is to its own. The pressure to blink is not evenly distributed. It falls overwhelmingly on the side that has elections in 7 months, a 30% fuel price increase, a public that never supported this war, an ally it cannot control, and a military strategy that costs $1 million per intercept against a $10,000 drone. Someone is going to blink first in this conflict. The question of who that will be and when is exactly what we will keep tracking here on Vortex Global Report every single day. Subscribe to this channel, share this video, join us live Monday through Friday. The mainstream media is giving you the official version. We are giving you the complete picture. We will see you in the next one.